Welcome to my channel. Before I tell you what really happened at that night, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches, because what I'm about to share isn't something I ever thought I'd say out loud. It started like any other evening, calm, simple, familiar. But by the time the credits rolled on the movie we're watching, everything had changed. He said something so soft, so unexpected, that it sent a shiver down my spine and made my heart pound in my chest. And from that moment on, there was no going back. Now, let me take you there. It was a rainy Tuesday night, the kind of night where the wind knocks the shutters just enough to remind you how alone the world can feel when you're older and living in a house far too big for one. I had just finished cleaning the kitchen after dinner, humming to myself and sipping Ona's second glass of red wine when Liam came in from the living room with that boyish grin of his. "Mom," he said, "you've still up for a movie." I smiled, wiping my hands on a dish towel. Of course, I've been waiting. Liam had moved back in a few months ago, a breakup that had left him drained. I didn't ask too many questions, didn't have to. I knew heartbreak when I saw it, and secretly I didn't mind having him home again. The house didn't echo so loudly when he was around. Was settled on the couch, a soft throw blanket covering both our legs, the room lit only by the flicker of the screen and the occasional lightning flash outside. The storm had gotten heavier, rattling against the windows, but inside it was warm and safe. I leaned into the cushions, a little buzzed from the wine, and watched Lion out of the corner of my eye as he scrolled through the streaming options. He'd always been handsome, taloned, lean, with soft brown hair and a strong jaw that made people do double takes in public. But now, at 30, there was something else. A steadiness, a quiet weight behind his eyes. It made him wonder about the things he'd seen, the pain he hadn't told me about. We ended up watching some old thriller from '90s, something we'd both seen a dozen times. But it was never about the movie. It was about the silence between lines, the comfort of sharing space without needing to fill it with noise. About halfway through, I felt Lion shift beside me. His arm brushed against mine, and I didn't move away. It was innocent, just warmth, familiarity. "You cold?" he asked softly. I shook my head but didn't speak. My throat felt tight for some reason. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was something else, something in the air I couldn't quite name. A few more minutes passed, then Helen a little closer. The scent of Hiskin, clean and faintly citrus, mingling with mine. "Mom," he whispered. The way he said it made me look at him slowly. His face was lit only by the flicker of the TV, but his eyes, those deep, honest eyes, were looking straight into mine. "What is it, honey?" He paused. I could feel the air shift between us. Something was coming. My heart began to pound, not because I was afraid, but because I could sense this wasn't going to be just another night. "I don't know how to say this," he murmured, almost ashamed. "But when I'm with you like this, I feel some meeting I've never felt before. Something. I don't know how to explain." My breath caught. I stared at him, unsure whether I had heard him right. My fingers clutched at the blanket a little tighter. Not from fear, but from the sudden intensity of the moment. "Lion." "I know it's wrong," he said quickly, almost panicking. "I know I shouldn't say it. But I've been thinking about it for weeks. Every time watch a movie together, every time I hear you laugh in the kitchen or walk around in your robe in the morning. I feel something, and I don't know what to do with it." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My lips parted slightly. And for a moment, all I could hear was the hum off TV and the distant rumble off thunder. This wasn't something either of us had planned. And yet as he looked at me, I saw no cruelty or manipulation in his foes. Just vulnerability, honesty, and something else. Something aching and deep. "You're lonely," I finally said, my voice softer than I expected. "So are you," he whispered. My chest dashed. He wasn't wrong. There were nights I cried into my pillow, remembering how quiet it got after my husband died. long days without touch. The Andil's hours filled with nothing but routine Sand reruns. Lamb had become my only real connection to something warm, something alive. And now this. I should have pulled away. I should have told him to stop. Instead, I reached for his hand gently, slowly, and he let me. Nothing else happened that night. No lines were crossed, no vows were broken. Something between us cracked open. A door, a window, a buried truth we could no longer pretend wasn't there. When the movie ended, neither of us moved. The credits rolled. The rain softened. I kept holding his hand, and I knew deep down that this wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning felt different. Not because of anything that happened, but because of what didn't. I woke up before the sun rose, as I usually did. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, tying my robe loosely around my waist. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside hushed and still, and the sky was that deep, early blue just before the first golden light breaks through. I didn't know if Lion was awake yet, but part of me hoped he wasn't. I needed a moment, just a moment. I stood at the sink, staring out at the yard as the coffee brewed, my thoughts a quiet storm off their own. What had he really meant last night? Had I really felt? Had I imagined a whole thing, or worse, wanted it to be something more than it was? I didn't they've long to wonder. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Heavy, slow, deliberate. He always walked like that, like he carried the world on his shoulders. "Morning," he said, his voice low and still raspy from sleep. I turned, offering a soft smile that I hoped would calm us both. "Morning," he looked at me the same way. Oh, he always did. But now I saw the difference. The hesitation behind his eyes, the question sitting silently between us. I didn't answer it, not yet. I poured him a mug of coffee and handed it over. Like nothing had happened. We sat at the kitchen table in silence, sipping. From our cups, that clock ticking louder than usual on Thule. "You okay?" he asked finally. I nodded. But it wasn't quite honest. He didn't answer right away. He looked down into his mug, tracing his finger along the rim. "I meant what I said last night." I knew he did. Hearing it again stirred something in Mr. Mac. An uneasy flutter, part fear, part something else entirely. "Liam, I don't know what to do with that." "I don't either," he admitted, his ice rising too. Meet mine. But pretending it's not real doesn't help. I've tried. I've tried to ignore it, to shake it off like it's some silly idea that'll pass. But it hasn't. And last night I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I should have shut it down. That's what a mother does, right? She creates boundaries. She protects. She says their right thing even when it's hard. But I didn't, because a part of me, one I hadn't listened to in a very long time, wasn't just hearing his words. It was feeling them. And I knew exactly what he meant. I'd felt it in the quiet glances, the lingering hugs, the way he looked at Em when I wore that old silk robe, Theon, I used to wear for my husband. I'd felt it in the late-night talks on Thepprich when the wine had made us both more honest than we meant to be. I'd felt it in the way my heart had started skipping, not because I was his mother, but because I was still a woman, and he had somehow slowly made me feel like one again. He reached across the table then, his fingers brushing Gagan's mine, not demanding, not pushing, just there, just offering. "I'm not asking for anything," he said quietly. "I just needed you to know." I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. I too. The next few days passed like a dream I couldn't quite wake up from. Nothing more was said. But the air between us was thick with what hadn't been spoken. We moved around each other carefully, polite, gentle, but never theism. One night I caught him watching as I folded laundry on the couch. I was wearing a soft V-neck top, nothing special, but it dipped just enough to make me self-conscious under. His gaze it pretended not to notice, but my hands trembled slightly as I folded his shirt. He stood there a moment longer than I needed to, then turned and walked back to his room without a word. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how long it had been since someone looked at me that way. Really looked at me. Not as Amithar, not as a widow, just as a woman. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next weekend we made dinner together. Pasta, garlic bread, a salad neither of us touched. We poured wine, laughed too hard at nothing, and at one point, while reaching over the counter to hand him a plate, I felt his hand settle on the small of my back. It was barely a touch, a moment, but it sent thee up my spine. We didn't talk about it. It's just like we didn't talk about the way our eyes meant a second too long after the dishes were done. Or the way my heart raced when he leaned in close to grab something. Behind me, we just existed in it. And then one night it happened. We were watching another movie, some slow, quiet drama with long pauses and not much action. I'd had 2 glasses off wine. He'd had 1. I was curled up on's couch, legs tucked under me, wearing a thin cotton tank and loose pajamas. He sat beside me, closer than usual. Not touching, but close enough to feel it. Halfway through the movie, without looking at me, he said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "You don't know what you do to me." I turned my head slowly, unsure I'd heard him right, but his face was serious, soft, eyes shining in the dark. "Lion." He looked at me now fully. "I think about you all the time, not just as Mimum, but as someone who's beautiful, who's kind, who makes me feel something I haven't felt in years. And I know I shouldn't. I know it's complicated. Booty can't help it." My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. The room felt like it had shrunk around us. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just watched him as he spoke the words I've tried to bury deep inside myself. "I want to be near you," he said, leaning in. "Now, I want to make you feel what I feel, even if it's just for a moment." That was the second time he changed everything, and this time I didn't pull away. The pause between his words and my response felt endless. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, but because I did, and I was scared of how easy it came. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached up and brushed Hishek with my fingertips. A small, trembling touch. He closed his eyes, leaning into my hand like it was the only warmth he'd felt in years. And maybe, in some strange way, maybe it was for me, too. That night, we didn't do anything we'd regret. Beauty of everything changed. He stayed beside me on the couch, both of us half watching the rest of the movie, though neither of us could remember what it was about. His arm eventually draped around Miss Holder's, and I leaned in, resting my head against his chest. We didn't speak. His fingers played softly in my hair, and I listened to the steady beat of his heart. A comfort, a question, a storm waiting in silence. I should have felt guilt, shame, but Allie felt was peace. And later, when we both got up from the couch, awkward, unsure, tiptoeing around whatever line we just crossed, I caught this gaze again before he disappeared into the hallway. "Good night," I said quietly. "Good night, Mom," he replied. But Theward hung oddly between us, a shape that no longer quite fit the way it used to. The next morning was painfully ordinary. I made eggs, he made coffee. The sky was clear, birds chirped, and it felt almost labeled that such a normal day could follow the night before. But beneath the surface, everything had shifted. We were more careful with each other, more gentle, but more aware. We started finding reasons to spend time together, in small, subtle ways. Hayford to help me clean out the attic, something he'd been avoiding for years. I asked him to stay in for dinner instead of going out with his friends. We watched movies more often. Kukatakter went on long walks just before dusk when the sky turned orange and the world felt quieter. One night on one of those walks, I asked, "What are we doing, Liam?" He stopped walking and looked at me seriously. "I don't know, but I don't want to stop, and neither did I." The truth was binary. Him made me feel something I hadn't in decades, desired alive. Not as a role or a responsibility, but as a person, as a woman. Still, I wrestled with the weight of it all. I thought about my late husband, about how he'd feel looking down and seeing his son so close to Maine this new way. But even that guilt didn't feel as sharp as I expected. In some strange way, it felt like Lion Waste only person who had really seen me since my husband died. He knew the version of me that was grieving, aging, lonely, but also the one that still had softness, laughter, and warmth. He'd been there through the worst and had stayed. That had to mean something. Another evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, I reached to take a plate from him, and our hands touched. We both froze. Then slowly he leaned in, his breath brushing my cheek. "Do you want me to stop?" he asked. I closed my eyes. "No," I whispered. His lips barely brushed against mine. Not demanding, just an echo of a thought we'd both been holding in for too long. It was tender, cautious, electric. He kissed me like I was fragile, sacred, even like, if he wasn't careful, a de-sapper. And I kissed him back with years of silence in my bones, with a hunger I'd buried under grief and Duvion time. That moment didn't ask for permission. Simply happened like rain falling after a long drought. When weaponly pulled apart, I touched his face again. "This doesn't feel wrong." I said, surprised by my own honesty. "It does own it," he agreed, resting his forehead against mine. "It feels like something that was always there, waiting for us to see. We didn't rush anything." That night, we didn't go any further than that kiss, and the way healed me afterward, like I was the most precious thing in the world. I laid my head on his chest as we sat on the sofa, the blanket draped over our legs. Again like that very first night. But now it felt different. Now it was us. From that point forward, the rhythm of our lives changed. Everything was more deliberate. We were more in tune with one another. Gentle glances across the table. Soft laughter that lingered longer, the way his hand walled rest just a moment too long. On Min one afternoon, I stood in front of my closet, staring at my clothes. I didn't know what I was looking for. Only that I wanted to feel good in my outskin again. Desired, beautiful. I pulled out a silky burgundy top I hadn't worn in years and paired it with a black skirt that hugged my hips a little too well. I checked myself in the mirror, brushing my hair over Miss Holder, my fingers trembling. When I stepped into the living room, Lion was sitting on the couch reading. He looked up and froze. "Okay." His eyes traveled over me slowly, not in a crude way, but like he was seeing me for the very first time. I felt heat bloom across my chest, up my neck, but I didn't look away. "You look," he started, then stopped, setting the book down. "You'll look incredible. That one looks at everything." And later, as we sat outside, watching sun dip below the horizon, he reached for my hand again. Emma Hest, my name sounding strange and sweet in his tongue instead of the word mom. "Whatever. This is, I don't want to hide it." His words landed like a quiet truth on the breeze. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at our hands intertwined so naturally, like they'd always belonged together. "Neither do I." I said, "Beak," because in that moment I realized something. We hadn't chosen this connection, but we also hadn't fought it. We had simply found each other again. To people who had lost so much were discovering love in the most unexpected place of all. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone, not even a little. The days that followed were both the most peaceful and the most uncertain of my life. There was no official beginning to what Lion and I had become. No conversation labeling it, no promises exchanged in candlelight. Just a growing closeness like ivy slowly wrapping itself around something long left bare. We had slipped into something unspoken, something tender and fragile. And neither of us dared disturb it by putting too fine a point on it. But it was there every day in every glance and brush of the hand, in the way he made my coffee just how I liked it without tasking, in how I find myself waiting for his footsteps when the house was too quiet. One evening we had dinner out on the back patio. The sun had just dipped behind the trees, the sky still painted in pale orange and lavender. I'd lit candles, he'd opened a bottle of wine, there was no special occasion. It was just one of those rare warm nights that makes you want to stay outside. Forever. He looked at me across the table, eyes thoughtful. Do you ever wonder what this really is? His voice was low, careful. All the time, I answered. He nodded, and there was a pause before he said, but I didn't want it to end. I don't either. I said just as softly. We didn't talk much after that. The air between us had said enough. Later that night, we were back inside, curled up on the sofa again. It's like we had been so many nights before. But this time, the closeness felt heavier. There was a hush to it, a stillness just before the tide changes. I rested my head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around me like he'd done it 100 times. But when his hand gently ran along my arm, it wasn't casual. It was deliberate. His fingers traced small circles on my skin, slow and steady, as if he were memorizing me by touch. He looked up at him, and he looked down at Em. Neither of us smiled. It wasn't playful or teasing. It was something deeper, reverent. Real. He leaned in, this time not questioning, not pausing. Our lips met again, warmer, more assertive, more willing to linger. Anthon, wordlessly, he took my hand and led me to my room. We didn't speak as Wes stood there in the dim light, a soft hesitation, flicker in his eyes. He was still unsure, still giving me space to stop this. But I didn't want to stop it, not anymore. I reached for the hem of my top, slowly pulling it over my head. I stood there in front of him, bare shoulders and heart exposed, daring him to not look away. He didn't. He stepped it forward and kissed me again, his hands trembling as they rested on my waist. Everything was slow, intentional. There was no rush, no urgency, just discovery, like we were learning the language of each other's bodies with the patience of people who had nothing left to prove. And when we finally laid down, his body close to mine, I didn't feel like amateur or a widow or a woman of 66. I felt whole, cherished, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with being seen. Afterward, we stayed there in the quiet, tangled together under the soft sheets, the glow of the bedside lamp casting gold across his skin. I ran my fingers through his hair as he lay against me, our breathing since it's steady. Are you okay? He asked, finally breaking the silence. Kay nodded. I am. He lifted his head, looking at Tense with that same gentle intensity. I don't know what this makes us or what teat means, but I know I've never felt closer to anyone in my life. My eyes welled unexpectedly. I hadn't cried in a long time, not like Theet. Not out of joy, not out of that strange sweet relief of being chosen again, seen, loved. I don't need a label, I said. I just need you to be honest with me always. I will, he whispered. And he was. From that day on, everything shifted. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the quiet choices. He no longer stayed in his old room. He touched me more freely, kissed him with less fear. We started cooking breakfast together, brushing shoulders in the kitchen like a couple learning the rhythm of morning love. The house that once echoed with loneliness now rang with soft laughter and shared silence. We didn't tell anyone. We couldn't. It wasn't about shame. It was about protection. This bond, strange and beautiful, it wasn't something the world would understand. But we didn't need them to. One afternoon, I found an old photo in the attic. Me in my 30s holding Lamb when he was just a baby. I stared at it for a long time, not with regret, but with thaw, at how time had moved so strangely, so unpredictably, how it had brought us back to one another in a way no one could have expected. He came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. You were beautiful then, he murmured, looking over Miss Holder. But I think you're even more beautiful now. I turned, searching his face. Are sure this is real for you? He didn't hesitate. It's the only thing that's felt real in a long time. And that was enough. We still had our moments of doubt. Guilt would creep in late at night, questions neither of us could answer. But in the end, we always came back Tothus. We made each other feel alive, whole, loved. And as far as I was concerned, that was the purest kind af truth, the kind you don't run from. Second, you hold on too. Even if the world will never understand, even if the beginning was strange, this was our story. And I wouldn't change a single page.